This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And on this week's episode, Jonathan is taking a look at the alternate timeline weaponry of the Wolfenstein franchise.
The thing about converting a firearm to a directed energy weapon is, well, it's essentially like converting a water pistol into a machine gun. You know, you've got some of the same basic ergonomics, but that's it. Nothing else is going to be carried over to the finished gun.
If there are any other games, guns, and mechanics that you guys want to see Jonathan break down, let us know in the comment section below. And for something a little bit different, make sure to check out our new series, Mind Games, a show that explores the psychological impact of gaming, from our relationship with loot boxes to the psychology behind horror games. Right, time to check out the guns of Wolfenstein.
Alright, seems like a good place to start. The Luger, or something close to the Luger anyway. So we're still in the 40s at this point, and we have something not massively accurate for the Luger. It's recognisably a Luger in terms of its silhouette. Not one thing on it is correct. Trigger guard, very, very chunky. We do have the interesting Luger half moon trigger. I'm not sure everyone's aware of. The toggle action is basically there, but all the shapes are different. Notably the ears, as it were, the knurled lugs that you grasp to actually operate the weapon, they look more like car wheels on this. The twist-on, twist-off suppressor is not a thing. What you can't do is just, quick detach. That's not a system that existed. And then even stuff like this distinctive shape of the frame is there, but there's an extra weird shaped insert and various screw-looking features that are just not on the real gun. Even the grip has two weird, one thing, I can't see the actual magazine catch. That seems to have slipped across and become part of the grip. It's like a Luger created by someone who saw a Luger once, so that's not being too harsh. But then the whole game is highly stylized, a reboot of a 2.5D FPS from 1992. So I don't think we can be too exacting. I'm just here to point out interesting details. So moving on within this game to the futuristic pistol derived from the Luger, or inspired by the Luger, which is not something that happened in real life. In real life, this became, completely replaced by the P38 and its derivatives, which is a completely different design, much simplified, cheaper to make, less complicated as well, and therefore more reliable in the long run. Although a similar kind of silhouette, a very different pistol. What they didn't do is take the iconic pistol and develop it onwards. Now that decision had already been taken by, strangely enough, 1938. So alternate timeline, I know alternate timeline, I cannot see the Luger getting so radically evolved into some sort of weird machine pistol. I think it is in this. It seems to fire burst, or even if it was just a normal pistol, it's just not something you do. But in pop culture logic, your iconic Nazi pistol, keeping that and making it look more sort of sci-fi in a parallel 1960s where they've been investing heavily in all sorts of technology, it makes a strange kind of sense. Alright, next one along. It's not quite the same design. The rear of the frame has changed, and some of the detailing has changed, but it's pretty close. I think it's one of those sequel guns where I don't think we're supposed to spot the differences. Although having said that, the little red highlights from the previous version are now yellow, so I don't know if that's significant. I haven't played New Colossus, I've only played New Order. It still gives us that Luger in space vibe. A little bit more streamlined, a bit shorter too by the look of it. Maybe that's my imagination. And funnily enough, when you put the little skinny suppressor on it, it still brings you back to this iconic sort of silhouette. So this very elaborate alternate reality Thompson, which is basically what we're looking at, sheet metal and unnecessarily carved bits of wood, and it's sort of like a Thompson, but not really. I think it speaks to the artistically led design process of the weapons in this game, that for a very short part of the game, we have a totally different Thompson. They could have got one from an asset library, they could have revamped one from the previous game, maybe, or just made a straight up 1928 Thompson gun. But they didn't do that. They just went, nope, we're going to design a gun that you, in this case, you won't even ever see in the rest of the game from scratch. That's radically different to the real one. And you know what? I can't really complain about that. I will notice it. I will comment on it, but that's their choice. Right, I've pulled out, not necessarily the emotional support Sturmgewehr, just a Sturmgewehr, but because that's essentially what we're looking at here, but it's a weird parallel universe MP44 or STG44. This one's marked MP44, but needless to say, perhaps, this thing doesn't really look a whole lot like the thing on screen. What I'm looking at looks more like, I don't know, a comic book version of a Sturmgewehr, and maybe that's okay, because Wolfenstein really is inspired by comics based on wartime adventure, and comics very rarely bother to get guns right, or if they do, they stretch proportions, they change features. So this feels like increasingly, these games feel like a conscious effort to do their take on that design. So the big standout here are the huge housings that are either side and forward of the buttstock, but behind the magazine well. You can see them in the first person view, you can see them very clearly looking down at this gun on the ground. They're not inspired by anything on the real gun at all, or anything else I can think of. They're there purely for design purposes. The grip frame is somewhat similar and has the wooden grip panels. We've got a wooden buttstock, we have a metal handguard, so we have that overall feel of a Sturmgewehr. They've moved the rear sight from its fairly distinctive position here, similar to where it would end up on the Kalashnikov as well, to back here on top of the receiver, and the differences go on. Rate of fire is pretty spot on. This thing chugs big time. Having been fortunate enough to fire one, it's a very similar rate of fire. Even the sound is actually pretty close to my recollection. I have unfairly paused this bang on a case ejection. Pleased to say that the primer is struck, for those of us that care. However, the whole cartridge case has a decidedly hexagonal look to it. So this is a relatively low poly cartridge case that's coming out of the gun. Hardly a problem. It flies out. You're not going to see it unless you pause and stare at the screen. And why would you do that? Only if a video game review company was asking you to do it on camera. And staring at this thing in the sort of hip-firing view, a lot of the conventional firearms in these games are very busy. They look cool, but there are features there that don't appear to have any practical function and would be a real pain and a lot of cost to machine, and really just aren't doing anything. With sci-fi stuff, you can kind of hand-wave away that sort of design, but here we have to just accept that the parallel universe Nazis have over-designed, but they've really gone to town with this, and it would make it very heavy compared to what it needs to be, because what it needs to be is this, which is very svelte, actually, very slim. Okay, we are now edging towards, I think, maybe we have a nod to the Heckler & Koch family of roller delayed rifles, submachine guns. It's a bit of a reach, but the general more futuristic lines of this version of the what I guess we're going to call the Sturmgewehr, and especially the straight box magazine, do make me think that it's at least a nod to the G3, which is why I'm waving about a G3. Just in case you're scratching your head going, what's he talking about? This looks nothing like a G3. When we go into our first person view, we have very H&K diopter style sights, although the drum, which I assume does turn on this in theory, is on its close quarter battle U-shaped notch. It's not on its true diopter aperture setting for longer distance, but it's canted forward. The housing is very similar. The front hooded sight post is pure HK, and if you squint, the silhouette is not too far off a G3. This is an unusual beast. The magazine on the side kind of says FG42, as does the overall sort of profile, I suppose, but it is bolt action. We've got a fluted bolt there, which is not something that, well, it's quite a recent development in precision rifles as far as I know. Case ejection is also a bit strange, so the cases just kind of float out parallel, whereas the way cases are extracted and ejected inevitably imparts a spin to them. There's no other real way to do it. You have to have a claw of some sort that pulls the cartridge out, and then something that it hits, or perhaps an ejector plunger on the face of the bolt that gives force to the other side of the case head, and it twists the case out of the gun. In this case, it's very obvious because they come out very slowly, and obviously with a manually operated gun like this bolt action, they will tend to come out more slowly, but they won't just float out gracefully. From an engineering standpoint, I'm no engineer, I'm not sure how you'd get that big heavy scope to automatically flip up and down like that. The hybrid scopes that you'll have seen with pivoting mounts, they rely on you to physically overcome spring pressure or detent or press a catch sometimes as well and rock them out of the way. Some are spring loaded, so if you press a catch they flick out of the way for quick switching to your reflex sight. What they don't do is quickly flick the other way, because you'd need a system of linkages and springs and maybe even a motor to get that to work, so that's just kind of magic. It's also not great for maintaining zero. Magnifiers rocking in and out of the way is one thing, because they just have to be between your eye and the magnifying scope, but an actual magnifying optic pivoting in and out of your line of sight, really not a good idea, because every time that shifts there's a potential for your point of impact shifting, so your bullet doesn't go where your sight says it will. Not a good day if that happens. Right, traditional-ish side-by-side 12 gauge double barrel shotgun. I don't know what that weird bolt lever on the side is for. We have a top brake lever, conventional side acting top lever at the back there. Some pretty sci-fi lines to this thing, despite being, I believe, 1940s set. And then when we break it open, doesn't seem to require any catches pressing. They seem to be taking break open very literally. We literally break the gun open over our knee practically, shove in two rounds Doomslayer style, and flick the gun shut in a very cool fashion. There's a whacking great military style sling swivel on the left hand side of this, which doesn't really jibe very well with either what this is or those sort of deeply engraved, or in relief, leaves on the breeches, which are very decorative, which again is at odds with the very harsh lines of this gun. It doesn't look like an aesthetically pleasing sporting gun. And actually the barrels look to have been made in as a unit. Instead of being two separate round barrels attached together with a rib across the top, this looks to be a solid oval bit of steel that's been bored out. Alright, this is one I've not seen before, on account of it being in a game I haven't played yet. Right away, that design of folding wire buttstock attached at the bottom of the pistol grip and the top of the receiver, and the general sort of shape of it, and the German nature of the game, says Walther MPL to me. But as with all the other guns in the game, in detail, it's really very different from that. Intriguing design. It's actually marked MP61 on the side, which I guess gives us an idea that this was an early 60s parallel universe design, I guess, to complement the assault rifle. I don't know what the big thing on the side is. It looks like a sort of vape machine or something. I don't know what that would do. This is a conventional cartridge firing gun. I don't know why it would need a smokestack or whatever the heck that is on the side of the gun. It makes it way thicker than it needs to be, way heavier, quite unbalanced if it was real as well. I do like the moment taken to fold the stock shut to put the gun away. Or is it to transition to the dual wield? I'm not sure if it's both, one or both. Either way, it's cool that you see that done rather than just cutting straight to the, in this case, straight to the dual wield with the stocks folded, which you could easily have done. A little bit of attention to detail. Okay, what the bejesus is going on here? I should remember this, but I don't. We've got 2 Luger toggle actions that don't seem to move unless I'm blacking out periodically at this point. We've then got a magazine on the side with what looks like rounds, but the rounds don't move. And we have an opening top cover like a light machine gun, but this is clearly meant to be an automatic shotgun. Moving to the new Colossus, we've got a very different take on an auto shotgun, albeit with a very similar feed setup. We've got a lot more detail on the case heads that I can see on the right hand side here, so we might get some more interesting stuff going on there. I've already seen 3 spinning barrels there. Quite an intriguing looking design. Very different lines on it. It still has the Luger cues, but they're really minimized to the point of just being design cues of the 2 cocking ears. Let's have a look. And as if to answer my confusion over the previous version of the gun with the non-moving double Luger toggle locks, this gun does in fact have a toggle mechanism, even though it's somewhat disguised, and it actually works. It actually flips up like the proverbial knee joint, as we often describe this. So it's a Luger shotgun with Gatling barrels. Wow, that is impressive, I have to admit. The dual wield on the auto shotguns, seeing the cartridges feed up and around, albeit not clear how they're making it into the gun because there's no spring following them. They don't appear to be belted, and so the gun isn't dragging them through, but it looks cool. As does the cocking mechanism and the spinning barrels and the whole thing, really. This is quite an upgrade, I think, over the previous version. Now this one's fun. This is a mounted gun. I don't know if there's a handheld version of it. If there is, I'm about to find out. Definite MG42 inspiration, general shape, the top cover, the sort of side saddle, belt box, or this might function as a magazine, not clear. But then the rotating barrels on the front, which harks back to Wolfenstein 3D and the chain gun, I think it was already called at that time, which is incorrect. Yep, sure enough, we can dismount this thing and use it as essentially a modern form of the original chain gun from Wolfenstein 3D, which is what I was hoping was the case. Got 7.62mm written on the ammunition feed device. Now, I have adopted a strange voice because there's no real reason why this would be in 7.62. 7.62 by 51? That is clearly a reference to 7.62 NATO, and there is zero reason why NATO would exist in this timeline. They would almost certainly have carried on using 7.92 by 57 Mauser. No real reason not to, at least not for machine guns. Looking at that spinning barrel cluster, they're not normal barrels. Because you don't touch that part of a gun, and especially if you were going to try and carry it around, you wouldn't want the extra weight of barrel shrouds, which are there to either to support the barrel, as in the MG42's case, and to protect the user from the heat, also in the MG42's case. They do both jobs. Here they are there to hark back to the MG42. So we've got this Gatling version of the MG42, essentially. They don't really do anything, because you'd be mad to pick it up by the rotating barrels anyway. They just add weight, and complexity, and cost. But how else are you going to do a Gatling MG42 if you don't put MG42 barrel shrouds around the barrels? So various guns in these games that have lumps and bumps on them that don't make much sense. In this case, I think the big cylindrical thing in front of the magazine/belt drum is probably meant to be a motor. Yeah, so I think it would make sense. Yeah, if you look at the minigun, that has a very hefty motor on the side of it that runs parallel to the barrels. I think this is meant to evoke that look, even if they're not thinking about what motive power is actually spinning those barrels. You need electricity to run these things. Okay, another one I've forgotten about. So we've got a very chunky, very busy designated marksman rifle with bipod legs on top of the gun. We've got a Picatinny type rail there, which is a bit of a head scratcher, this supposed time frame, especially given that was invented in America. Weird glowy lights on the underside of the flip over sight, which doesn't even seem to fit that Picatinny rail. All very strange. It's a pretty far removed from a firearm of any kind, really. It looks a little bit more sci-fi than anything else I've looked at, I think. Okay, either I've gone insane or this thing has suddenly become a plasma rifle. Yeah, I don't know how that works, but we now are firing blue bolts of energy and charging the gun up rather than changing the magazine. I'd personally prefer if that was done as a separate weapon or some kind of visible conversion. Maybe I've missed something. But the thing about converting a firearm to a directed energy weapon is, well, it's essentially like converting a water pistol into a machine gun. You know, you've got some of the same basic ergonomics, but that's it. Nothing else is going to be carried over to the finished gun. Please do, if you can, come and visit us here at the Royal Armouries, one of our 3 sites. Check out the website or social media. You'll definitely want to, if you haven't seen it already, check out our own YouTube channel, which includes a series with me looking at various interesting firearms. In any case, we'll see you again here next week.